Thank you, Asim, for the introduction. Hi, everybody online. I will apologise. I know normally you don't start a presentation with an apology, but I came into town today without my reading glasses. So these cost me £15 from Boots Opticians. I can just about see my screen, but everybody else is a blur. So I'm going to pretend that you're engaged. You look quite engaged through these glasses, but anyway, I shall move on. So the theme of tonight's talk is securing and maintaining sponsor confidence. And despite what David said, we are in a world where there are still far too many projects failing. I'll talk a bit in a moment about my own background. But as a youthful software quality manager back in the early 1990s, I was doing a presentation on acetates rather than PowerPoint over Zoom, talking about why projects fail. And yes, there are fewer projects that fail these days, but there still are too many. So today, hopefully, what you'll get from the conversation is some insights and possibly some inspiration about what you can do as project managers to avoid those sorts of failures. So a little bit about me and Triad. Very kindly, you said over 35 years experience. I actually worked it out. It's actually over 40 years experience now. I left school at 18 and I celebrated my 59th birthday last week, and the whole of my career I've been involved in organisations, functions or departments that have been trying to improve the way a particular business operates, whether that was management services, IT, what have you. So I've collected a lot of experience in that time. I started off as a systems analyst, then I moved into software quality management. Some of you might remember that in the 90s, the trend around the British Quality Association and the ticket guide. That was a very good framework for people working in software delivery management and project management. So I got a lot of my project management scars on my back from that era. Ultimately, I became the IT director of Fortune 500 company, Avon Cosmetics, the lipstick company. So I picked up lots of great experience there on the client side. And then around 2010, I jumped over to the other side of the fence, the dark side, as some might say, and became involved with Triad Group PLC. Triad itself has also been around for nearly 40 years. We were floated on the London Stock Exchange in 1996, so we're fully listed PLC, but we're still a small to medium-sized enterprise, and that's quite a nice combination as far as I'm concerned. We've got that stature of being a PLC, but the agility of being an SME. Nowadays, we have something like 150 consultants working on various initiatives. Probably about 40 or 50 of them would be what we would call project managers or delivery managers, so there's quite a strong representation of project management within those ranks. Interestingly, on the BCS membership, we've got a significant cadre of business analysts, and there are far more BCS members as business analysts than there are as project managers. So that's maybe something I shall take back and discuss with the teams there, because we might be missing a trick. But anyway, Triad these days largely delivers into the UK public sector. So organisations you'll be familiar with, such as the Department for Transport, Department for Energy and Security and Net Zero, the Ministry of Justice, where we did win that particular award that Asim mentioned there. We're very proud to win that award on the night. We also won the User Research Project of the Year award and the Rising Star of the Year award at that same event. So that was a great night for Triad that particular evening. The subtitle of the presentation is From Prisons to Fuel Tankers, and you might think, well, how can I weave that in? Well, what it actually refers to is the range of projects we get involved in at Triad. So this particular award that we won was to roll out educational services to offenders within the prison estate at Ministry of Justice. And that's a really significant undertaking. It's really important to the rehabilitation of offenders. So it's a crucial initiative to be involved in. As you can imagine, prison estate is one of the most demanding estates to deliver projects within. So there's all sorts of challenges associated with that. But equally, we're helping Department for Transport to introduce levies and systems to ensure that the fuel tanker suppliers are using renewable fuel within their quotients of fuel that keeps the big lorries on the road. So that's the connection. And part of my argument is the techniques I've got to talk about tonight apply to that myriad of different kinds of projects. We're also doing some really interesting work at the moment with counter-terrorism, for example, and installing quite sophisticated infrastructure to deal with the threats of terrorism. And again, having robust project management capabilities within that domain is absolutely essential. So that's a bit about me and about Triad. As I said a moment ago, there are still too many projects failing. I have to say the research isn't particularly good. I was a bit disappointed when I was preparing for today's talk. I wanted to get some hard metrics on this, and I found quite a lot of anecdotal evidence, which possibly speaks to your point, David, about some of these stories being misreported, but there's still very much a sense that there are too many projects failing. So the Harvard Business Review wrote quite recently, big projects fail at an astonishing rate. That's quite a statement coming from the Harvard Business Review. CIO.com talks about technical and transformational initiatives still falling flat at an unacceptable rate. There's clearly something not quite right. And the BCS talks about a common cause of failure being the lack of executive support and sponsorship. And that was one of the themes that got me interested in the talk for tonight. In my own experience across those 40 years, I've been a sponsor, I've run projects with good sponsors and with bad sponsors, and I recognise the pivotal role that they play. And interestingly, where there is some data on this, it's in the CHAOS reports. I don't know whether anyone's familiar with the CHAOS database, but it's a database that's maintained by the Standish Group over in the US, and they are trying to collate a repository of data and metrics around project outcomes. And one of the key attributes of their work is the classification of projects into 3 outcomes. There's successful, there's challenged, and there's failure. Successful is a project that achieved on its objectives. Failure is one that completely missed the boat. Challenge, quite a few in between. Achieved some of what it set out to do, but not necessarily everything. And one of the interesting things that came out of their data was when you look at the successful projects, 67% of those projects had a reasonably mature to very mature sponsor, so a good sponsor, in other words. And when you look at that grid there with the metrics on it, there's a very strong correlation. Yes, there's only a dozen or so data points there, but there's a real strong suggestion that if you've got a highly mature sponsor running a large initiative, then the chances are it'll be successful. That's more likely an outcome than a failure. And I thought that was really interesting, and it very much echoed my own thinking. The project where we won the award, absolutely, we had a fantastic sponsor. The sponsor was actually on the stage with us when we picked up the award, and that wasn't for show. That was because he was very much part of that solution, and one of the reasons why we did indeed win it.
Can I just say that's a great slide? I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, and in terms of sources, that's in the CHAOS report. That they've actually, again, when I was doing my research for today, there is a booklet, a pamphlet available called "What Makes a Good Sponsor," and that's the headline table in there. So if you like, I'll share the link for that. You have to pay for it, but for me, paying 75 quid to unlock the key to what makes a good sponsor is worth any project manager's pocket money. So just moving on, the sponsor, per that data, is clearly a cornerstone of project success. Sometimes I think there's a lot of effort goes into selecting the project manager, selecting the project team. Far too little effort goes into selecting the sponsor, or when the sponsor is selected, saying, are you ready for this? But for me, what's really important about sponsor, and again, this is based on my anecdotal evidence over the years, some qualities I wanted to call out. So first of all is vision. Now for me, vision is about understanding what you're trying to achieve with this project. What is the transformational outcome that you're all about? And then having that commitment to drive the organisation towards the achievement of that vision. Also, it's not just having the vision, it's being able to articulate it, being able to inspire people to follow you. I was at a presentation by a leader within the UK law enforcement arena the other week, and it was such an uninspiring presentation that I left completely dispirited. I thought, my goodness, I wonder how the people in that person's organisation feel. I think sponsors have got this requirement, this necessity to be good speakers as well and inspirational. Provide that leadership, yes, but another thing that I think is crucial when it comes to sponsors is being able to glue the organisation together. What you want is a sponsor who will take some responsibility for identifying if there's an issue, if there's a blocker within the organisation, they'll roll their sleeves up and help the project manager to overcome those issues and take responsibility and an interest in doing that. And actually, to use the American phrase, put some skin in the game. Right? I think that's really crucial. I'm sure many of you in your own projects, your catalogue of what went well and what didn't go so well, have come across sponsors who've been aloof, stood back, and not committed. For me, that's an absolute recipe for disaster. Support kind of goes without saying. It is interesting. I think in the government circles now, the sponsor role is also known. You think of it as the SRO, the Senior Responsible Officer. And what's really interesting these days across government is the remit of an SRO really does involve providing support to the wider organisation, and that's actually written into their terms of reference. So it's very much an active role, not passive. Decision making is a really interesting area for me. And again, when you look at what makes a good sponsor report, they identify decision making. There's something they call decision making latency. So it's the speed with which the sponsor can make good, firm, robust decisions and the effect that decision making latency has on the rest of the project organisation. And part of the research, part of the analysis that they did was that one of the reasons why projects suffered was having an indecisive sponsor who couldn't make a decision. I guess we've all been involved in project steering boards and steering groups where we're serving up the same risk analysis, the same threats to a project, and what you desperately need is somebody to say, we're going to do this. And one of the problems with weak sponsors is they won't take that responsibility for making decisions.
Indecision's basically the problem, isn't it? I love that time. Was it latency?
Decision making latency. Yeah, so I think it nails the concept really well. I remember one programme director I worked with at the Ministry of Justice, and he used to say to me, making no decision is the biggest risk to the project. And I thought that was a really powerful insight. People were almost reassuring themselves by not making a decision, and yet by not making that decision, it really caused chaos.
Reminds me of lastminute.com, you know?
Yes.
You don't make it until you absolutely can't get away with not doing it.
Yeah. The latest responsible moment, as they say. So, I put in another attribute here, which you might find interesting, which is temperament. And again, this comes from my experience of not dozens, maybe even hundreds of projects, and the importance of having a good temperament as a project sponsor. So by temperament, I mean somebody who is able to deal with bad news well, can listen to what's being said, and can make a measured and reasonable response to that situation. When you think about it, that temperament is needed in moments of need. So when you've got a project that is going off the rails, that's when you need your sponsor to be there for you, for the project, for the organisation, able to make tough calls and not to make knee-jerk reactions. And again, going back to my earlier point about when teams are put together and the sponsor is selected, do people look at the temperament of a sponsor and say, that person can cope with those sorts of pressures? And I'd argue sometimes that's something that's overlooked, yet it's a crucial element. I think projects pivot around the temperament of a sponsor quite often, and it's the quality of that temperament and the way it feeds into decision making so important.
Don't you think sometimes the sponsor isn't selected? It just happens to be the person in charge of that department.
Absolutely. It's a default position. And part of my argument as the discussion goes on is that you should be selecting for that role in the same way as you think about the eye-watering day rates of contractor project managers. There's a big investment made in the project manager and PMO support, for example, but maybe there's not anywhere near enough attention being paid to the sponsor level.
Wonder if there's a gap, like training-wise, like those two things: decision-making, the art of decision-making, and just overall temperament, and that those kind of skills, softer skills, I suppose.
Yes.
But I've never come across any project management type training.
Isn't this something that could come out of the PMO? Making sure that everyone's geared up to be able to do their job properly.
What is interesting, as I said, Triad as an organisation does a lot of work for public sector clients. Quite a few of them are central government clients with this position of an SRO, which is effectively the sponsor. And where I will give some real credit is the enlightened approach now that's been adopted to the SRO position. Every major SRO has to go through a leadership programme at Saïd Business School, and it does deal with some of those dynamics and soft skills of executive project leadership, for example. And I think that's really refreshing that there's a cohort now. One of the metrics that the National Audit Office used to measure was the turnover of programme directors, because there was so much burnout and turnover of programme directors just because they weren't getting the right kind of support. Now they're starting to look in the mirror and look at the qualities and the capabilities of the SRO. I think it is starting to make a real difference. So I'm going to talk now about another dimension. So if the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed the pyramid has turned through 90 degrees, and we've got another cornerstone of success here. It's possibly a bit too subtle with my PowerPoint skills there to make the point. But another cornerstone of success for me, it's not just having a great sponsor, it's not just having a great project manager, it's that relationship, that glue, that bond between those two people in particular. For me, that's the critical bridge that exists between the delivery side of a project and the executive support and access to resources. So I just want to call out a few characteristics. And what I'm actually doing is using here some characteristics that were shared with me by one of these SROs of a major government programme. So some of you might be aware, if you watch your police dramas on the TV, of something called the PNC, the Police National Computer. Now it's actually over 50 years old, and I know very well the SRO who's been charged with replacing this monolithic application. And I asked him ahead of tonight's session to give me some of the things that he cherishes about his relationship with his programme director, and I thought I'd share that with you because it's coming from the horse's mouth. So first thing he called out was the absolute need for mutual trust and confidence. And he genuinely meant that two-way relationship of trust and confidence. So he has a confidential relationship with his project director. I would say that's still quite rare. I think with many sponsors, that they're a closed book as far as the project director is concerned. From his point of view, he's thinking we need to go to hell and back to make this very difficult, challenging transformation happen. So we need to be able to talk to each other. And in this context, the confidence is being able to say things that you perhaps wouldn't say in open forum. And I thought that was interesting and brave for him to say that. He talked about needing to be able to have open and robust dialogue. And it's quite interesting at the moment, if some of you follow some of the what's called entertainment on the TV, you've got Strictly Come Dancing at the minute. And part of the challenge with one of those situations, as far as I can understand, is the way the coaches have been talking to the dancers. Now, this guy is talking about a really, really challenging project, and he wants to be able to have robust dialogue with his project director. He wants his project director to be able to have robust dialogue with him. So he's saying that should be a natural thing, and there needs to be guidelines, there needs to be protocols in place, but we must be able to challenge each other and say, I think you've got it wrong. Part and parcel of that is creating an environment to challenge. So he's very much one for talking in a straight way, but also giving people some reassurances, and I've seen that in action. And then, last but not least, having common objectives and actually talking to his project director about what she wants out of the transformation versus what he wants, and hopefully aligning those two things, making sure that they are perfectly in sync. So I thought that was interesting to get that feedback from somebody who is in the role of project sponsor. And then looking at the sponsor in terms of their ask of people, I guess, like all of you, I'm assuming that all of you are in some sort of project delivery role, project director, project management, PMO. What do sponsors want from people charged with leading projects? But first of all, and you might find this one a bit strange, I've called out education. Now, the reason that I have highlighted that is, again, over the years, I've seen sponsors come in different shapes and sizes. I've seen some that have been extremely removed from the subject matter in hand, and some that have been micro-management types. For me, the best sort of sponsor is one that's not necessarily a subject matter expert, but somebody who's prepared to hear information about the problem that's being solved and is receptive to a bit of education from the project director. I think, first of all, if you've got a sponsor who's asking to be educated, secondly, if you've got a project leader who's willing to provide that education, that's a good way of starting the project. What the project sponsor needs to know is enough information about what could go wrong with a particular project in order to make those critical calls at the right moment in time. This might sound obvious, and I'll talk a bit more about this later on, but project sponsors need clear and concise information. And I'll leave it at that for now, but I will come back to what I mean by that. Honesty, again, really, really important. And honesty comes in many different shapes and forms, particularly within project management. And I've got a few examples in a moment that will help to pull that out. This, for me, is something that is particularly important. When I've commissioned projects in the past, when I've been leading organisations, I really wanted the project leaders to have that belief and conviction in the project itself, and for it to matter that it's going to be successful. I think sometimes it's all too easy to just think of this as a transactional situation, where some of the projects that we're involved in literally do involve life and death matters. So when we're working with counter-terrorism, for example, the calls that we make in that kind of environment are absolutely critical. Some of the stuff we're doing to make the environment cleaner, if we get some of those calculations wrong, it's going to make a substantial difference. So it's important that we've got people who care about it and have the conviction to push on and drive with that overarching outcome in mind. Confidence is important as well, and I'll talk later on about the acting like a pilot mindset, which I think helps to convey confidence. the sponsor has confidence in you as a project leader, then you will earn some latitude as well. If they're not confident that you've got a grip on the situation, you don't earn the right to take a few risks here and there that you need to in order to have that headroom to deliver success. And then another very important thing for me, and something I think that is really vital in that relationship, again, is to have transparency in terms of what's going on at speed. So I don't think I invented the saying at all, but I use it quite a lot. I'd rather that bad news travelled really fast in a project situation. Don't want it being buried, just get it surfaced as quickly as possible, and then together we'll see what we can do about it. An old boss of mine used a phrase, keep it from me and I'll be your judge, share it with me and I'll be your partner. And that was something that stayed with me throughout my career. It was very, very powerful. But basically what he was saying is, if I don't know anything about it, I can't help you. If you share it with me quickly, we can do something about it together. And then finally, and this might be slightly controversial, it'll be interesting to hear people's thoughts at some point about this, is what I'm calling appropriate filtering. Now you might think that flies in the face of honesty, but I think one of the skills of a project leader is to filter the information so what's important gets surfaced at the right time in the right way. That doesn't necessarily mean everything has to float up because you're not adding any value then as a project director. Equally, you could miss out something that's vital. One of the things I've learned the hard way is if you adopt a playbook approach to that filtering point and say, I did it for so-and-so, so I'm going to do it for the next person in exactly the same way, you could come a cropper. Why is that? Well, again, in my experience, sponsors are built in different ways, and part of the educational aspect up top is getting to know your sponsor and what kind of information they feed off. Some of them like the big picture, the overview, only tell me by exception what I need to know. Some of them are micromanagers and you need to feed them with that kind of information. What I would suggest as project leaders is you find that out quite quickly and early on in the relationship so you don't come a cropper later on.
How about project metrics?
Project metrics. In terms of what people need?
In terms of progress.
Yes, so I do talk later about the execution of a project and measurement accuracy and the importance of having appropriate metrics. I guess it depends on the project that you're running, whether you're doing some kind of earned value reporting or schedule reporting, schedule adherence. With a lot of the software projects that we're involved in, it's quite often data relating to releases and software defects as the measure of progress, and then that becomes a proxy for project progress. But again, I think it's important that as a project leader, you've got a repertoire, a portfolio of things that you can use. But part of setting up a project for success is working out what's right for the environment of that particular project. And in some instances, you can have too many metrics flying around and it becomes almost paralysis by analysis, and you don't actually drive a project forward. You spend far too long, we'll talk about in a moment, being absorbed by the paperwork of the project. But again, there's plenty of decent metrics. For me, it's that question, is it going to help to make the boat go faster? If it doesn't make a contribution to accelerating the progress of the boat, then you shouldn't be including it in the reporting pack.
I thought that was a really good common sense list there. And the more of that can be embedded in the governance, I would have thought the better, really.
Yes, yeah. Now, next one, my project sponsor on the slide, she's getting irritated now, so maybe
I
explore.
thought she was the project manager.
Well,
Sorry, sexist remark.
so originally I just had death by PowerPoint on this. I've actually expanded it to say death by PowerPoint or Microsoft project. I've seen so many steering board updates where there's been a 75-page PowerPoint deck to take the sponsorship and the steering group through. That's a terrible way to treat your sponsorship body. The human mind doesn't have the ability to process that kind of information. So I am an advocate of boiling things down into dashboards and just management by exception wherever possible. Likewise, don't expect everybody to understand critical path analysis. Do you all still do critical path and Gantt charts and things like that? Because what's really interesting is in the world of software delivery, we seem to have moved away from Gantt charts into sprint release reports and things like that. And I think the Gantt chart still has a place to play in software delivery, even if it's agile. But anyway.
I always found it useful when I did it years ago, because it helps you understand how things fit together, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think you need to expect your sponsor to understand the idiosyncrasies of a Gantt chart or a PERT analysis, as we used to do.
Critical path is basically what are the key dependencies that will derail us.
Well, then exactly that. I seem to articulate it into business terms rather than it to be a technical conversation. You use the technical underpinnings to inform the narrative that you then share with the project leader. So the sponsor, I should say.
I don't think you need just MS Project. You can do it on spreadsheet as well.
Yeah,
Dependencies.
Absolutely. It wasn't so much the tools here as the audience and the message and how you're wanting to convey that. There is some very opaque reporting, and for me, this is just a simple reminder of going back to the needs of the audience. And in presentation terms, they always used to say, understand your audience, understand what you need to convey. So again, whilst you might find it a bit strange, I wouldn't advocate playbook, the recipe approach to this. What I would advocate, that would be in the playbook, is go and find out what makes sense for that particular project, for that particular organisation. And I'll talk later on about culture as well, because I think that has an important part to play. I've got 3 areas where I have seen sponsors have real irritation when they've discovered they've been a victim of these approaches. So one of them's, not my phrase, but I'll share it with you, watermelon updates, and I'll talk about what a watermelon update is in a moment. The other is a less sinister version of the watermelon update, but it's a misleading progress report. And then the third one is any general form of optimism bias. And so I'll talk about each of those in turn. So, the watermelon update. Has anybody heard of watermelon update? Is that ringing a bell?
Sorry, it reminded me of the term.
Yes.
Kind of green on the outside and
What lurks beneath is actually red. Yeah. So that's we might all have done this at some point in our project management careers. When the message you want to transmit to the board, the sponsorship board, is one of green traffic lights galore, but actually, if you declared a bit more about the health and well-being of the project, about a specific key risk, for example, it would turn from green to red quite quickly. And part of the reason that you might be doing this is you know that if you've got a red alert on it, that pesky PMO function might say, we need to go and question this project and decide whether it's viable. And this is a real issue at the moment, particularly in organisations with constrained budgets, which is pretty much every organisation. There's competition for resources, there's competition for projects to be kept going. And there must be a real temptation on project leaders to report in a way that says that everything is hunky-dory. And that will really irritate sponsors. Well, I mean, there's a moral question about whether you should do that or not anyway. I would never encourage our people to do that, and hopefully everybody's built the same, but we all know that it does go on. But these watermelon updates, particularly when a sponsor finds out soon after the event, when they've had an update that said everything was green, and then something's come to light and it said, well, patently, this is a red situation, it's not a green situation. That's a terrible place to be in. because what have you done? As well as misreporting the situation, you've broken that trust and confidence with your sponsor. And that's a very hard position to recover from. So I'd be very wary of that and try and steer clear of it. A slightly less sinister version of this, but it can be equally damaging, is a misleading progress report. This, for me, and I think you might have mentioned, David, in your update earlier, the golden triangle of time, cost and quality. It's a basic, fundamental aspect of what we all do. And yet, to me, it's still amazing how many times you can misfire getting that triangle of relationship right. And particularly when it comes to reporting back to your sponsor. So I've seen situations where a naive project manager said, great news, everybody, we're 20% under on the budget. And you think, whoa, fantastic, can we bank that then? You start to dig underneath it and you actually find out that you're behind schedule on certain activities, or you haven't hit the required quality, which means that you've got to go through another cycle of rework. And before you know it, you're behind on budget, you're behind on cost and schedule, and the quality is under pressure. So I put that as misleading rather than the watermelon update, because I think quite often it's a lack of experience with project leaders. A good sponsor will sniff out that kind of misleading or underreporting, if you like, but it's something that is quite irritating, because once you realise that's a situation where you've had a report that says we're 20% under budget, when you do the working through, you actually find out that you're over budget rather than under budget. You're in a reset situation straight away with that particular project or programme initiative. And once you start having to rework the fundamentals of a project like that, I think it's a very difficult place, because you're on the back foot.
That's an assurance issue as well, isn't it? Because the project manager might want to put it down one particular way, but you require your assurance to sort of pick the bones out of that to make sure the sponsor's happy. Yeah.
Yes, and assurance, I guess, could be a function, it could be people, or it could be an aspect of the scrutiny and its questions. I think where I was coming from is more about the digging a bit deeper into the reporting, and again having smart, experienced people who know what kind of questions to ask. I've seen where bodies have been buried in the past and have got some experience. Yes, something to watch out for. And then the third thing I would highlight as quite irritating to sponsors is this notion of optimism bias. Now, that's a term that's used quite widely in the civil service. I know that might be used elsewhere in other industries, but it's the term used to refer to people thinking that actually they can get a whole chunk of things done in a small space of time, or they can do a great big amount of work with a budget that's far lower than it really ought to be. And again, the pressures are such within an organisation where you might have rates of return, hurdle rates, for example, on a business case, or there might be an imperative to get something done by a fixed point in time, and people will say, yes, we can do that. And there's an optimism bias creeping in. Now, you might be thinking, what's the geological reference I've got on my slide? That's the Cornish coastline, and that was a phrase I used to urge caution about in a company I used to work in. I said, look, we're not going to Cornish coastline territory, are we? Now, for me, what the Cornish coastline looks like is a Gantt chart that's been squeezed up. I don't know how many of you have been involved in the final lap of a project, and suddenly, where we were clearly behind schedule, the project leader saying, no, we'll be able to finish on time. And for me, that's the Cornish coastline being scrunched up like that. It took Mother Nature a hell of a lot to make that happen. I'm sure a project manager wouldn't be able to do it that easily, but that's something to watch out for as well. Again, I think something that's really important, and for me is interesting when David was talking about the school earlier, because I think we as experienced project professionals have got a duty to share some of our experience and observations and learnings with others. A lot of these things I'm talking about here is born out of good intentions. So you've got people who want to be doing a good job, they want to be making the right kind of noises, but what I found out fairly early on in my career was the gritty reality is what matters. You need truth, honesty, and a realistic mindset to be successful in project management. So I just want to talk for a few minutes now about trust and confidence. These are things that we definitely worked on with the sponsor in the Ministry of Justice Prisons project and with other major initiatives. And again, some of this draws on my own experience. So some of these phrases you won't find in project management textbooks, but they come from the school of life, if you like. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the pilot concept. I think probably most of us have been in an aeroplane, flown off on a holiday somewhere. Hopefully that's an experience that most people have enjoyed. Something that struck me about the pilot and the way they handle themselves, they're supremely confident, very reassuring. Quite often what the pilot will do at the beginning of the flight is announce himself to the assembled passengers on board and talk them through what the journey is going to consist of, some of the sites. So if you look on the left, you see the Alps, you look on the right, you see the Mediterranean, and you just get this sense that the pilot has been there before, he knows what he's doing, he's got a view of the end-to-end journey, that the project, the landing, and he will land us safely. And you think, oh, this guy knows what's going on. So that's an element of the pilot concept I think is very applicable to project managers. And again, at the start of a project, which is a quite crucial stage when you're getting to know people and you're wanting to engender that esprit de corps and that following, it's good to think like a pilot. And the other thing that I was asking you whether you'd had the pleasure of a flight before. Some of you might have had the displeasure of turbulence. Now, great pilots will anticipate turbulence and they'll come across again on the tannoy and say, there's going to be some turbulence ahead. Nothing to worry about. This is how long it's likely to last. Buckle up, I'll see you right. And again, I think that's a fantastic metaphor for a project leader to announce, because if your project doesn't have difficulties at some point, it's probably not a great project. For me, a really good project needs to do something difficult, and that sometimes means that you need to go through some challenging scenarios. Again, an experienced project manager acting like the pilot will pre-announce that turbulence, get the buy-in and the reassurance, and take people on the journey with them. So for me, that's a nice concept. And then the other one that I particularly like is the Goodwill bank account, the Bank of Goodwill. And this is a notion where you need to, early on, try and put some deposits into your Goodwill account with your stakeholders. And in this case, I'm thinking project manager and sponsor, or the steering board. So how can we do that? Well, one thing that we encourage at Triad is to set out our stall quite modestly initially in a project and say what we're going to do over the first week or two, do it, and then play back the fact that we said we would do this, we've done it, and it's been successful. That starts to encourage a nice virtuous cycle where the sponsorship board are expecting us to say what we're going to do it, and then reflect on it and build on it. And that, for me, is how you make deposits in the Goodwill bank account. Why do you need those deposits there? Well, for me, where it really helps is if you need to call on a favour with your sponsor, say, we've got a real problem here, we're going to need to spend 50 grand this month that we hadn't budgeted, for example. They will trust you because you've got that track record of success. Now, part of the tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them that you've done it technique is to get them realising that you are actually in control. So there is a bit of conditioning involved in that. And some might say it's manipulation, but for me, it's the right kind of manipulation because you're trying to condition your sponsor into knowing that you're a safe pair of hands. So that's another one of the concepts that I like. Then just getting towards the end of the talk, I've got 3 techniques or areas I quite like as a project professional myself that I've seen work really well. So one of them's really established and been doing it since Adam was a project manager, and some of the others are a bit more modern and contemporary. First one of which is the pre-mortem. So has anybody come across the concept of a pre-mortem? Can't hear anybody online, that's it. So a pre-mortem sounds like a post-mortem, which happens after death. Pre-mortem is happening before death. So essentially, it's a workshop intervention where you pull everybody together at the beginning of a stage. So it could be at the beginning of a program or a project, and you say, imagine this has gone belly up. Imagine the project has been a complete failure. Let's dig into that and find out what went wrong, why it went wrong, who was where, what was the situation, what was the environment, what were the circumstances. And the idea is that you rehearse proactively all of the risk factors in a particular project. I did this once with the CIO at a great British company called West Coast, £4 billion technology distributor. It's one of UK's best kept secrets. And I said to Carl, the CIO, let's do a pre-mortem on this massive project that we're about to start. I said, we'll get the developers in the room, we'll get the analysts, we'll get some of the customer stakeholders from within the business, and we'll ask them what they could imagine would make this project fail. And he said, no, we can't do that. I just can't allow that sort of conversation to take place. I said, Carl, please trust me with this. Let's give it a go. And when we went through it, it was the most liberating, positive, enlightening experience that he could ever have imagined. It was really powerful. You had developers actually coming up with ideas that helped to make the project eventually a great success. There was a sense of we're all in it together. The people felt that they were allowed to think the unthinkable, which they probably wouldn't have been allowed to say out loud if the project was in flight mode. So it's a fantastic mechanism for getting people to air their concerns. It works brilliantly on team building. It gives a reference point, which is really powerful. So if something does look like it's heading the way of the pre-mortem, one of the things that was suggested in the pre-mortem, you can say, remember when this happened in the pre-mortem, this is what we said we would do to counteract it. So it gives you that reference point. It gives you an opportunity to road test your planning principles nice and early on. I've used it quite a lot at the beginning of programs, but you can use it at various stages. So if you're going from stage to stage in a large program, you can do a pre-mortem and use it almost as a fresh kick-off for that next step. And where it works really well, I've seen lots of risk registers that have quite a few hypotheticals in there. This is a fantastic technique for priming the risk register with some really valid concerns. So pre-mortem, I think, is a great tool for project managers, project directors to use. I think it's useful to the project, but it's also useful to the project director as an individual, because it gives them an opportunity to engage with the rest of the team to show some leadership. Risk, I know everybody, this is the really established technique I was talking about earlier. Everybody deals with risk. When we talked earlier about metrics, I think execution risk is a great area for metrics to be applied. So if you've got a good handle on your metrics of execution, and that could be whatever is appropriate for the project. So I talked about software projects, they would have their own execution metrics associated with it. Construction projects might have different ones. But if you've got accuracy around your measurement there, I think it really helps you to stave off execution risks. If you haven't got an accurate measurement system, I think it's much more difficult to predict whether you're going to have an execution risk. Because if you don't know how fast you're running, how do you know you're going to get to the finishing line by a particular point in time? white space risk, because it's a relatively new concept for me, but it's the areas of uncertainty across particularly large programs. So stuff that hasn't even been thought of. And when I was reading into this, I immediately thought of the Donald Rumsfeld little catchphrase of there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Now, some people sniff at the Rumsfeld 3. I think they are amazingly useful for a project, because it's true that there are some things you know, there are some things you don't know, but you know where they're coming from, and there's other stuff that happens to projects, and you should expect the unexpected. And any project plan that says it's 100% watertight in its assumptions is plainly nonsense. So for me, the good test on your white space risk management is, have you allowed for your known knowns? Have you got space for your known unknowns? And is there some wiggle room in there for the unknown unknowns? And goodness knows what an unknown unknown is, but there will be something like that occur in a project, and you should be on guard to fend against it. And then the other thing, the other area of risk management, which I really like, is this notion of integration. So if you've run a complex project in the past and you've got multiple work streams on the go, integration is absolutely crucial to getting everything together at the right time. I was responding to a request for information the other day about something, I likened it to HS2, which is perhaps one of the most complex programs you can think of. And in my simple reduction of that, I talked about the need to create high-speed tracks, but also to build high-speed trains to run on them. And you've got parallel paths almost literally going on there, but you need to integrate all of that into a single outcome, which is trains leaving the station on time and working. And for me, a lot of that is around dependency management. And I don't see enough in good project management of people actively dealing with dependency. So where your project relies on something elsewhere to be done by a certain point in time to a certain level of quality, but guess what? You're not in charge of it. You've got to facilitate, you've got to influence it. So that's another area that I think is really important. And then the final technique, for want of a better term, that I wanted to talk about, and this is for organisations where doing projects is a routine thing. So I've worked in large corporates where we've had our own in-house project capability. Triad, one of the services we provide is the project management capability into the Ministry of Justice. So we've got 25 people dedicated to MOJ doing their project management for them, helping to upskill their own project management team. So organisations where you've got a number of projects on the go at any point in time, and doing projects is part of the DNA, if you like, of that. I think this notion of communities of practice is really, really useful, really powerful. We've got a project management community of practice that, without a shadow of a doubt, helped us to win the Project Excellence Award, because we've got peers within the PMO, the project management community of practice, helping each other, sharing best practice, comparing case notes, introducing new ideas. It's a really powerful mechanism. But now what we've started to do is have our communities of practice engage with the client organisation. We've been setting up communities of practice within our client space. So what we're doing is part of our legacy. It's not just delivering great projects, but creating capability within the client organisation. Some might say, well, you're doing yourselves out of a job, and we'll say, yes, we are, but we're a relatively small organisation, so there'll be plenty of work for us. I think what's important from a professional point of view is we're upskilling the organisation as we go along. So we've seen lots of benefits with COPs, in-house standardisation, optimising the way we do things. So optimisation for me is being able to do more with less. What's great though about a community of practice is it's not a top-down kind of directive, it's the community improving itself for itself, and the company, the organisation gets the benefits of it as well. Really strong continuous improvement. So particularly I've mentioned software delivery a few times today. With that whole iterative development mindset, the community of practice lends itself really well to that, and there is a lovely synergy between project management and software delivery on that footing. Where you need to really reinforce the culture of an organisation, so the way we do things around here. Communities of practice, again, are a really powerful vehicle, great vehicle for doing that. You can help to reinforce norms in the organisation by having a thriving COP. One of the things that we've seen is we've had some superstars come up through the ranks because they've got the exposure within the community of practice that they might otherwise not have done. There is a problem with project work. I think we all recognise this, where you can get sucked into the project, and particularly if you're working in a larger organisation, you don't get much visibility outside the boundaries of that particular project at that point in time. The communities of practice are a great way of connecting with people, and I would absolutely guarantee that we, as I said earlier, we're doing more with less, which means improved delivery and improved speed as well. One of the byproducts that we have noticed, the very fact that we've got a community of practice that is alive and kicking and doing things and producing artefacts, and you know, the Triad community of practice, for example, has done show and tells for clients like the MOJ. They've been a particular beneficiary of it. It really does help your sponsors to believe in the method and the approach when you see something like that in action.
I think, I mean, I had in my head the confidence word, but by doing the sort of work that you've been doing, it seems that it increased the confidence of the organisation as a whole, you know, to
Definitely.
do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it partly goes back to your reference about anecdotal reporting on project success or failure. Another thing about the communities of practice is you talk about what's worked, you talk about what hasn't worked, but you actually start to use, again, your idea of real case studies to inform the conversation. And people do draw confidence from that. Even if it's a project that went hideously wrong, to be able to talk about it and to give the organisation license to talk about it is very, very positive.
It could work in a supplier model where there's this software which is basically given out to multiple clients, and the clients maybe form a community of practice, and all of that knowledge going in will ultimately feed up to a better product.
Yes, one of the things that we are starting to facilitate at the moment is this network effect of the communities of practice. So we've got ours, then we've primed in two different client organisations, and we're trying to get them to talk to each other, and then hopefully them to reach out to other similar bodies, and you just get that virtuous cycle, hopefully, of people collaborating and exchanging ideas, and it becomes quite organic then. I mean, that's the other thing I should have said about those community of practices. They're self-organising. They've got licence from the management team at Triad to exist, and they've got budget to run themselves. A bit more budget than you guys have got there. That's a miserly sum you've got to work with, isn't it?
Thanks for reminding us. It's actually what you just said. It's like the product user groups, isn't it? Software product user groups. It's run by the users.
Yes. Yeah. And again, that's we've had mixed results with some of those communities of practice. So some of them have caught on, and the flywheel has started to turn quite quickly, and it's looking after itself. Others have needed a bit more nudging and encouragement, and I think that's part of the management responsibility is to keep faith in it and keep pushing it along. So I just wanted to pull things together now, just round off by saying hopefully if you take on board some of the thoughts that I've shared, help you and your sponsor to sort out your information needs. You've dealt with pace and engagement and how you want to work together. As I said, with the goodwill account, establish a track record nice and early and then build on it. Honesty and integrity, absolutely rippling through everything you do. That trust, that confidence can only come from that. Sharing experiences with your sponsor does help to secure the confidence. Part of the honesty bit is saying what's going well, what's not. I keep going back to this notion though, if this is a blind date between the project sponsor and the project manager, it's liable to fail. There needs to be some positive matching to get that right chemistry in place. And that gets me to the end of my chat for today. It was great to pick up a couple of questions along the way, but all yours now in terms of further questions, either from the floor or the virtual floor.
Well, I've got a question which came up on the very last slide, actually. And all the way through your talk, I mean, I thought it was excellent, by the way. There's a lot of sort of motherhood and obvious things there, but the reason... Sorry?
I'm not embarrassed about that.
No, absolutely, no. That's what works
Yeah.
when people abide by those things. And I suppose the interest is in why some of these don't work, when it's blindingly obvious that some of them should be done, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's
To us, anyway.
we're still plagued by the not invented here syndrome. So sometimes people don't like hearing motherhood from someone else. The one thing that I would love to be able to do a better job of is helping organisations not to make mistakes and learn the hard way. But it almost seems that's part of the way we're wired, that we need to learn the hard way in order to get the motherhood and apple pie.
Well, that's how we learn in life, you know, growing up, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is as primitive as that in some respects. And yeah, nobody likes an "I told you so" moment, but there are so many avoidable.
Yeah, but sometimes it's how you tell them.
Yes.
How you tell them you're being an idiot, you know.
Yeah. We sometimes talk at Triad about the need to lead from the back. So, playing position, you're not necessarily the leader of an initiative, but you can see what's going on, and it's how you use your influence to help people understand that they're about to make a big mistake and try and steer them away from it. Again, another thing that hopefully comes through this is experience is a very valuable commodity if you use it well.
The lessons learned often just becomes lessons listed, and I think that pre-mortem, you know, if somehow the knowledge base can be tapped into a pre-mortem type forum, you know, there's probably more ownership in the room because they feel like they've kind of come out with it and they've kind of taken on board some of that.
It's a great point. We actually inform and prime the pre-mortem with a selected post-mortem set of outputs. So we'll say, we're about to kick off this project. It feels like project X or project Y that was completed. We do post-mortem or post-implementation review on those. We actively lift the lessons learned from that and put them into the pre-mortem as provocations. So at least there's one revisiting of the lessons listed to hopefully become lessons applied to a forward-looking project, because there are so many times where retrospectives or lesson learned events just consign that data to a virtual shelf somewhere, and they're not referenced ever again. So we try and create a bit of a feedback loop there that does give them some added value forward-looking.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of organisations, they avoid the post-implementation reviews because everyone's already assigned to something new. Oh, we haven't got time
Expanded.
to do it. Yeah.
Well, there's that on the one hand, or projects never actually finishing. They're always in some state of progress, and so we do advocate having retrospectives throughout a project, and not necessarily waiting for what's called completion in somebody's mind, because sometimes completion is far too late to get the benefit from a retrospective or lessons learned anyway.
I think it's good to talk about achieving the low-hanging fruit at the beginning,
Yeah.
and people can learn from that as well.
Were there any questions online, Simon?
No, not yet. I've been encouraging them to speak up, but that's just Ian's just saying thank you for a great presentation. But yeah, absolutely. People online are totally part of this conversation. If you want to join us, please do. You can either turn your mic on and preferably a video, or just send in a chat, and I'll do my best to read it out.
Any?
Okay, people saying thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Any comments here at all?
Anything? I mean, I love that some of the points like that I've made notes on my phone, just like the lack of decision or indecision being the biggest, risk to a project program, and the fact that that term decision latency, I've never heard that, or I don't remember if I ever did. But it's
Clearly a thing. I think when it gets academic attention, then in some ways that's quite reassuring as a professional, because you think it's not only me and my projects where that phenomenon exists. It's got some industry commonality to it. So yeah.
I see Enrico has a question. Enrico, did you want to explain your question to us?
Enrico's one of our committee members, and he's based in. Is he based in
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
A question from Saudi Arabia.
Okay, he says his mic isn't working. I guess I have to believe him.
Type it up,
So he said,
chat.
you have mentioned decision-making earlier. What are your thoughts on deciding on the last responsible moment, keeping in mind the cone of uncertainty?
Yeah, cone of uncertainty. And is everybody familiar with the cone of uncertainty? It's the degree of accuracy that you can lend to estimates as things progress. But
How sure you are.
how sure you ought to be.
Right.
Yeah, it is. We as an organisation are advocates for the agile mindset, which again is something that encourages postponing decisions until the last responsible moment. But you do need to have a degree of knowledge and experience to determine when it's the last responsible moment. It reminds me a bit of a novice driver of a car deciding when is the last responsible moment to apply the brakes as you're going around the bend. Well, if you pick the wrong moment there, it could have catastrophic consequences. So it's one of those things that's fine in principle. I think to keep the road metaphor going, it needs to be road tested, and I wouldn't take significant risks on the last responsible moment until I built up a bit of track record. And again, this goes back to the goodwill accounting kind of mindset. Don't just jump in straight away, making risky decisions or taking risky approaches, and test your thinking, test the assumptions, and let the leash out more steadily, particularly when the stakes are high.
I have a question from Paula, which I think I'd actually add a supplemental to. Paula's question is, what can you do to help sponsors make decisions at the right time? My addition to that is it the sponsors who make decisions?
Yeah. I was aware sometimes I was interchanging sponsors with steering boards and things like that. For me, it's the body responsible for making decisions that I would concentrate on there. I've only just come across the anatomy of the sponsor and things like the decision-making latency myself. I think that is a great tool to share with sponsors to say, there's some fantastic research on the role, responsibilities that perhaps none of us knew existed before. why don't we go through some of this? I think there are techniques that you can use to accelerate decision making. I think the boldness of project managers is important here as well. So the program director I talked about, my example, at MOJ, he was an experienced program director, but he said quite overtly, making no decision is the biggest risk this program can take. And actually, they took a decision because of that stark fact that he laid out there. So I think some of it goes back to the straight talking and the challenge. I think another responsibility of the project manager is to set out the consequences of not making a decision and to make that very clear. Whether there's a timeline risk, a cost risk, alignment risk. That's the other thing that I think, perhaps going back to your point about metrics, some of the metrics that we started to use more often these days are people-based metrics. So what is the mood of the project team, for example? And that's become something that sponsors are interested in. So how is everybody feeling? Is everybody in a good place? Now, poor decision-making practices can really drive, as we all know, a project team nuts. So having data on that kind of thing can feed into the narrative as well. So I think there's a range of techniques. Doing nothing should not be an option for the project manager. I think they have to be active, not passive.
My experience with, because I've done a fair amount of work with government departments, including MOJ, in the past, and one of the things that is important, obviously, is the relationship, but also making absolutely sure you get in writing if there is something that you think is a risk, and give them your solution. Don't just throw up in the air something. Come up with how you're going to deal with it, and hopefully the sponsor's going to at least read it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think documenting decisions or discussions is an important part of accountability for everybody, and it's a discipline sometimes that gets overlooked. I think as well, to be a positive project leader is an important thing. So if it feels like the wheels are spinning a bit, try and facilitate some discussion, maybe get an options paper done, for example, that kind of thing. There are interventions that people can make.
Yeah, step back and let people breathe before rushing ahead again.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things in here from Pete. The first one is a comment. There's a tendency to dwell on negatives, but it's every bit as important to celebrate shared successes. The best leaders know how to praise sincerely. And
Can I just come in on that? Because I agree totally with what Pete's saying. And another behaviour that I think allied to that, the best leaders walk the floor in whichever form that floor takes, but they're connected to the project delivery team, the wider organisation, living and breathing it, and they're present. And part of the recognition they give is actually out there in public. I'd firmly echo what Pete said there.
And he goes on to say there's much to be said for capturing assumptions, exclusions and limitations for project management and also through life costs. Yes, that's just an observation, I think. Ian likes the concept of pre-mortem, and he says he does something similar with identifying risks by actually having an assumption workshop. Risks are assumptions that go wrong.
For some reason, the concept of a pre-mortem seems to capture the imagination quite well. So in my experience, people involved in projects, particularly from the executive, quite like the idea of getting involved in a pre-mortem. Getting involved in an assumptions workshop wouldn't float their boat in the same way, and yet they're probably 90% similar. So
Is that effectively the same as a risk workshop at the beginning of a programme?
Yeah,
Whether you're exploring all of the risks that should go upstairs.
I mean, I think what we do with the pre-mortems is try and make it scenario-based as well, so you're actually simulating a situation, so that there is a degree of engagement to be had from that.
I think visually, pre-mortem sounds good. I mean, I've never used the expression, but I've done, risk assessments right at the beginning, and most of the stuff coming out in a pre-mortem is going to end up in a risk register, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I like the expression.
I think language and concepts can really play a part in securing the audience.
Otherwise, you'll end up the other way around, with a post-mortem. Yeah. Can I ask a question about your prisons project? And it sounds quite exciting what you've done in terms of bringing education into that sector. I mean, it's got more publicity these days.
Yes.
So do you know how that's going on now, since you've...
It's continuing to be rolled out. It's a case of initially establishing the platform and piloting it with a group of early adopter prisons and offenders and the staff as well, because everybody has to be involved in this. It's quite a significant change. And now it's being rolled out across the entirety of the estate. And it's one of those situations where initially it's about establishing the platform and then making that platform really work. So it's got years left of development, because it should be a continuous process. But what's exciting about it is when they start to overlay the data on the outcomes, and they look at rehabilitation, reoffending rates, and the correlation between the inputs and the interventions in the educational space and the lifetime experience of the offender. So it's a very long-term investment in terms of the actual benefits, but
Presumably it's a mixture of one-on-one and one-on-group, is that right, the educators?
a lot of it's screen-based as well,
Yeah.
so personalised learning.
Yeah. No, it sounds really...
There's such, as you might imagine, there's such a wide range of learning needs.
It's a huge scope, isn't there,
environment,
to be honest, yeah.
Yeah. And you've got a new minister, James Timpson, from the Timpsons chain, who's put his money where his mouth is, and has made a great play of employing ex-offenders into Timpsons.
That was a bit of an irony there, wasn't there? Yeah.
Yes, to cut keys, yes. Yeah, but he's applying some of that business experience to his brief. Yeah, so that's an area. We've got the budget coming up in a week or so's time, and we're obviously worried about where the money's going. But I think there's a real commitment to improving the situation in prisons.
Be interesting to see the stats on the success, won't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But that's one of the things that has impressed me is the commitment to data analytics to look at the return on investment from an outcomes point of view. So it's not just a case of the project is finished when we've installed the kit. It's much more about seeing it right through to the eventual outcome.
We have a couple more. Asim is lurking, and you are.
All right, no, if we've got
Okay, for
4.5 minutes.
Alex has an interesting question about whether sponsors in different industries, some have better attributes than others for the roles. Right? I think there's a suggestion there that there's a cultural difference between different industries in terms of how well the sponsorship works.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's based around industry, but there is a very broad spectrum of personalities and types I've come across in the role of sponsor. I mean, I alluded to some of those stereotypes, the microphone manager versus the hands-off. Yeah, I think there are some differences. So some industries are much more operationally focused than others. The knowledge-based sector, for example, can be a lot more conceptual and strategic. sometimes that doesn't mesh so well with the operational clashes. But again, it goes back to my fundamental, which is build an approach that's context appropriate. And so understand the environment, understand who's done what, who's got what in terms of skills and capabilities. I know it's easier said than done, but I might as well start with an ideal world scenario and compromise.
And one last one from Enrico. He's observing that often a black swan event gives rise to disruption and innovation, and he wondered whether your Ministry of Justice project experienced such a thing.
COVID was a really significant event for us because we suddenly went from having a fleet of 25, 30 project managers on the ground to them being remote, having to develop a range of project delivery techniques that could be effective in a virtual environment. Was a sight to behold, and they managed to do that. There are some specifics to introduce working in the prisons environment, particular forms of risk assessment for people working there. We've got a duty of care towards our employees, obviously, but I think in terms of major disruptive events and changes to the business model, then COVID absolutely was that for us. And I will say, COVID itself wasn't positive, but the effect of those changes was positive for us as an organisation.
Transformed our world, hasn't it?
It has, yes.
I wouldn't be here today with a hybrid event if it wasn't for the learning.
Yeah.